Welcome to the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary review show, episode 6, the final episode. It's all been building to this, but before we get into it all, we want to get into Game Up Hard Hydration. It's like your favorite sports drink and your favorite seltzer got together, had a baby, but it's so much better. Dave's going to give you the rundown.
Yeah, guys, it's an 8-pack. We got 4 great flavors. We're talking fruit punch, orange, lemon lime, and grape. Guys, it's only 110 calories. It's a low-carb drink, so you don't have to feel guilty about it. You can just enjoy it, unlike the Mr. McMahon documentary, where you might feel a little guilty about enjoying it.
Oh, man, this one started out with the quote of all quotes, and I wrote it down almost verbatim, but starts off, Vince McMahon says, I have not too different. I have like computers in my head, and sometimes they work against me. I have one computer talking to you right now, and there's another one going with me thinking something completely different. And then there's a third one sometimes. If I wanted to tap into it, I could. So it's difficult for me sometimes to pay attention to things, and it bothered me through the years. All I've wanted to be is just normal. I wanted to fit in, but I deal with it because that's who you are. Just deal with it, Vince. It doesn't matter that you want to be this way or that way. Here's where you are. You're different. Be different. And you know the expression, fuck the world. The producer asks what that third brain is thinking about, and Vince says something having a lot of fun, and it's involving sex. So 2 different things here. First off, we got the sex computer in Vince's head, and you know that one is wild. But does this almost sound like undiagnosed ADHD or
Yes.
some kind of like learning issue? Because he says that he doesn't feel normal and he's thinking about like different things. I don't know. It sounded like something undiagnosed to me.
Sounded like a guy who had some kind of neurological problem, whether it was like on the spectrum of autism with a little ADHD. And then, as a bonus, you also grew up in an abusive home while having this problem to begin with, which means whoever was his actual dad and the mom, maybe they had some of this stuff going on possibly too. That's what it sounds like to me anyway. I mean, I might have had a little experience with dealing with some of this stuff before, and some of this sounds familiar, not on the sexual level, because I can't explain that. But yeah, I mean, that definitely is what it sounds like. It sounds like that's when you're talking about the way he's talking about thinking and being different, it sounds like some form of ADHD. Maybe he's on the spectrum or something's going on there.
I mean, it definitely sounded like it had been a struggle for him his whole life. And this was both interesting because of the scandals, interesting because it showed a little vulnerability from somebody who didn't normally show vulnerability. And it's just the way they kick off the final episode. Now, you go from talking about this to they cover the WrestleMania versus Trump. Dave Meltzer says it was the biggest pay-per-view audience in the history of pro wrestling pay-per-view. It's wild to see Trump hitting Vince with a lariat and punches. Bob Costas says that Donald Trump's sensibility and persona is much closer to that of a wrestler than it is of a statesman. And I think that kind of encapsulates Trump well. I think it's that reason that makes a lot of people like him, and then also a lot of people dislike him. It's one of the reasons that I'm not a Trump person, is because when you see how he acts in public, you and me obviously look at that and we go, oh, that's pro wrestling 101. He's being a heel. But then the fact that people get behind it and want that to be their president of the United States is a little jarring for me. And it's just wild that it's all covered here. What are your thoughts on it? Get into it politically if you want.
I just feel like we're smart marks, even to like a presidential scene. We're like, oh, come on, you guys don't fucking get it. It's a work. It's a goddamn work, and I just, whatever. I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, they talk about it very well in this documentary, and not necessarily I felt like in a place of negativity or positivity, just if you look at the clips of Trump in this talking about, cutting these promos, right, involved in wrestling, they're not far off. And they take some clips from his, when he's out there on the campaign trail, and they kind of blend it in. And there was somebody who even said, wrestling has influenced so much form of entertainment. Like, why wouldn't we influence politics either? And if you're not in the wrestling bubble, you probably think that's ridiculous as hell. But if you watch this documentary and you watch enough of this stuff, you're going to get it after a while. You're like, oh, shit. This is exactly what this is.
Another thing I want to bring up, because Trump has also been making a lot of podcast appearances lately. Have you heard of this idea that Trump talks about of the weave when he's in interviews?
The weave?
The weave. So he'll get asked a question
Mhm.
and then he starts talking and he kind of spins like this big story. And it's almost like he kind of answers the question, but doesn't. But he's
Right.
doing a lot of talking, giving you this big response. And to me, and he explains it like that in his interviews. I might not be explaining it as well, but he just recently did appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. He had done an appearance on the Flagrant podcast with Andrew Schultz. And during these two appearances, he kind of explains the weave as a way to answer a question, but not really answer it. And to me, that once again sounds like pro wrestling 101. You kind
Sure
of
does.
you start talking, you give them a little bit of truth, but then you spin a lot of fantasy, you spin a lot of, hyperbole around it, and it's a way to cloud the answer. And we're
So,
going to move away from Trump
well,
because we
I'm
don't
going
need
to
to
say
sit
one
on
thing,
it too
move
long.
away, but I can't resist at this point. This kind of reminds me of Dave Chappelle talking about in his skit where Donald Trump, the reason why he felt like he caught off because he was the most honest liar, where he was trying to say, I exploit the tax game because it's there and she knows about it. And Obama were like, what do you mean? It's not set up. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's what he said. And, we know he's lying, but like, that's the truth. And it's like, he's kind of telling you, I'm not giving you an answer. It's so blatant. And it's like, people are like, woo, all right.
And does that not sound like Vince a little bit? We've sat with Vince for 6 episodes of this. And I guess that's kind of why I wanted to get into the Trump thing.
Yes.
We run the risk of getting a little political with it. But
Right.
you're seeing a lot of Trump and Vince and
Yeah.
the same way. These guys are two very similar individuals.
A little bit of Dana White too, I would say, but Dana not quite as much as these guys, but he's in that family. So yeah, interesting.
100%. And they move on from the Battle of the Billionaires to Vince wanting to kill off his character. Now, after the Attitude Era, the Mr. McMahon character was more selectively used on TV. And to kind of write his character off instead of, just writing him off, he figures I couldn't be on TV if I'm dead. So they do the limo blow up. I don't know what it says about Trump, but Trump called to make sure that Vince was okay, which to me, I don't want to say it's dumb, but there's a certain lack of awareness in that moment.
Brother, don't you know it's a work? You were in it.
It's a little wild that the story got abandoned due to the Benoit murder suicide. Mm-hmm. So, he kind of had to go back on TV, which is crazy given if he was dead, he couldn't be on TV.
Hey.
And Vince says Chris went nuts. It happens in every form of life and everything. So that's the only thing I can take away from it. And this, in the documentary, they go on to talk about Chris Nowinski and CTE talk. Right. But what did you think of that quote about Chris just went nuts?
It's pretty dismissive of a complicated subject. It was real, as you'll talk about, but like it was real easy to just label this as steroids, like some people did. But it's also real easy just to say he went crazy. No, this is a guy who clearly had problems with his mental health and his brain, and it was most likely due to the repeated concussions he had over the years. Whether it was that off the top rope headbutt, which he's going to explain is a work. And yes, that's true to a point, but he was taking the brunt on his head in a lot of situations. And more importantly, the unprotected chair shots that we don't do anymore, So I think it really the brain's a complicated thing, more so than we probably even understand, obviously. But yeah, I think it's very dismissive to say that it was either A, steroids like the news media did, or B, like Vince said, he just went crazy. No, I don't think that's what happened at all.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into it with the headbutt because we'll get into it now. Chris Nowinski suspected brain trauma when he heard this because by all accounts, Benoit was a very loving husband and father. And this didn't fit with what everybody knew about him. Vince says the doctor's statement was ridiculous. I think I took that note and I wish I had put which doctor's statement, but I believe it was the thought that brain trauma caused this. I have it right here. Vince says the flying headbutt is a work. Well, if it's so much a work, why was it that Harley Race, who often did the move, would tell people that it'll shorten your career? It's not something you want to emulate, but yet a lot of wrestlers use it. I mean, to this day, I believe